Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is doing well this evening. This is Michelle Biggs. I am the host of Real Conversations with Michelle. I am also the CEO of My Best Everyday Coaching and Consulting. This series has been started to provide an opportunity for individuals to hear different topics that many of us have struggled with the goal that something that you share will allow you to do something very positive for yourself. And tonight's episode is an extension of the first episode, which dealt with racism, moving from anger to action and healing. In this episode, we will be talking about anti racism, becoming an ally and advocate. And I have the pleasure of having an esteemed group of individuals joining me today who I will have introduce themselves. First up, Miss Lisa Benna. How are you, Lisa?
I'm very good, Michelle. How are you?
Good, good. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lisa Benna, and I'm a previous coworker of Michelle's, and I'm really honored to be a part of this call. I've worked in several global corporations over my career, and right now I'm actually I'll say semi-retired and looking to start a new adventure. So I'm really pleased to be here with you all.
Thank you, Lisa. And Lisa's being humble. Lisa was a senior vice president of human resources. So a very big job and really helped us to move our organization forward in a positive manner. So thank you, Lisa, for joining.
Absolutely.
Next up, I have the Carla Pearson.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to participate on your show. I know that this has been a labor of love for you, so I am just honored that you have asked me to be a part of this. So, I am Carla Pearson, and I have been working with Michelle for the last several years. I have the privilege of leading a marketing organization at a pharmaceutical company. In addition to the work that I do professionally, I am a wife and a mother of three children.
Thank you, Miss Carla. And next I have my neighbor, Miss Tori Bennett.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on tonight as part of this group. Like Michelle said, I am a neighbor and hopefully somewhat of a friend. We're getting to know each other better and better. I am a longtime teacher. I am a wife and mother to two children. I grew up in Southern California, which is actually where I'm coming from today. I'm visiting some family. But I grew up in Southern California, but have lived in the South, in Atlanta and Raleigh, Wake Forest, for about 25 years. So,
thank you for joining me, Tori. And we'll talk about our good trouble that we got into later. Next, I have up Miss Lois Thompson. Hi, Lois.
Hi, thanks for having me on the call tonight. I met you, Michelle, back in 2017, back in when I was recertifying as a life coach in Raleigh, and I was really drawn to your energy then. So my name's Lois Thompson. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I'm a personal development coach and an energy healing practitioner. And I'm really on my beginning journey of becoming an ally and an advocate.
Yeah, thank you. And I was so inspired by some of the things that I've seen you post. So I'm glad you're able to join us. Next, I have Pastor Ed Clemens. Hi, Pastor Ed.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for having me on the call. It's been an honor, like everyone else has said. I've watched you through the years, and me and you go way back in our ministry days. Michelle was a part of our church about 4 to 5 years ago. She was a member there and made a huge impact on our ministry at the time. So thank you so much for having me. But my name is Pastor Ed Clemens. I am an ordained minister. I'm also a doctor. I have a doctorate of pharmacy, which I graduated from Florida A&M University in 2011. First generation doctor, first generation pastor. So a lot of curses just broken on my family. And I'm also married to my beautiful wife, Yvette. We've been married for 13 years now, and it's been a blessing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. And last but not least, my beautiful couple, the
Hi.
Harrells. Hey, Andrea. Hey, Jordan. How are
Hey.
you?
Good. I am
Good.
Andrea Garrett Harrell. Miss Michelle Biggs was my mentor in high school. I was just telling Jordan how inspired I was by her when I was like 15, 16. She had these long locks. She was a Delta. She was sassy, fashionable. So it's so fun to be a part of this with you today. And this is my husband.
I'm Jordan, and thank you, Michelle, for opening this up for us. I'm really excited to be involved in this as well. We're currently in Atlanta, Georgia, where we've been living for the past year now. And I'm a software developer here. So
Yeah. Andrea, you're going to start me crying first thing. Don't get me to start crying first thing during this episode. It doesn't take long. So we'll get started with this. And I have a question I want to start off with for everyone. And it is about just 2 words. How would you describe how you're feeling right now about all things race relations here in the United States? So I'll start with you, Jordan, and Andrea. I'll start with you first.
yeah, I'd say overwhelmingly for me, it's against the better judgment of my mind, the feeling as a white person of being uncomfortable. I want relief from thinking about it.
Yeah.
I've had that luxury my entire life, and I want it back, and I know I need to fight that feeling. So
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. How about you, Andrea?
I think I float between hopeful and excited and pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to hear more conversations about reparations. And so I think not hearing that has me kind of pessimistic a lot of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about that, I mean, we know we've been dealing with this as African Americans, 400 years of just dealing with the craziness that is still today, right? Tori, how about you?
A lot of different, I mean, I could probably give you 10 words. I go definitely between heartbroken, but also hopeful. Like the whole situation is horrific, but I'm really hopeful that, I'll tell you, I have some experience by it, and not a lot out of that. So I'm really hopeful that now there seems to be a lot more of a conversation about it. So I'm hopeful in that aspect.
All right, thank you. And Tori, you're sounding a little bit broken, a little bit. So maybe
Okay.
when we're in the green room, we can get that fixed a little bit.
Okay.
Miss Lois, how about you?
Well, the 2 words, I'm holding 2 things simultaneously. One is hopeful, and the other is actually disappointed. I'm disappointed in my fellow white people who came on board rapidly, and then many have disappeared. So it's both.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we do your segment. Pastor Ed.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the things is I'm motivated. And I'm actually motivated by Miss Lois's term when she said that, everyone jumped in and now they're like, poof. I'm motivated to keep it going. And I'm motivated to not stop talking about it. I'm motivated to keep going because if we don't, then there won't be a solution that needs to take place within our nation. So I'm motivated to keep talking. And then I moved from anger to action. And so action is not really an emotion, but that's just how I feel. I feel like I have to take action, and whatever that looks like, I have to do it. And so that's where I am, motivated and ready to take action.
Good. How about you, Carla?
Yeah, I think like most, I'm stuck between two sets of two words. And the first is a dream deferred. And so I think about that poem by Langston Hughes, and what continues to come to mind is the part that talks about stinks like a rotten meat. And maybe it just sags like a heavy load. And so the load is heavy. And as I mentioned, being the mother of three children, one of which is a 20-year-old Black male, is one that I continue to struggle and certainly pray for his safety. And so that's the part that stinks, and that's the part that is just such a heavy load. But then I have mixed emotions, and I go back to the MLK quote that talks about we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. And so, like many have already said, there is a level of hope and optimism because there is an awakening that has happened in our country. And I think we have to continue to tap into that so that we don't go back to sleep. As we have, talked about just the outpouring of support from white people, neighbors, co-workers, has been like I've never seen before. And so that's the part of me that has a level of hope and optimism. But things have seemed to slow down over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you, Carla. And I'll tell my words once I hear Lisa's words. Lisa, what would two words would you describe?
Yeah, I think we're all feeling very similar. And I would say I feel saddened because of the shift, I'll say, in terms of momentum around this. And so sad that why isn't that continuing to go? And similar to Pastor, I feel, how do we help take action, right? How do we continue to do that? So on the flip side, I feel very hopeful and optimistic that this can be an impetus for change. And that's really kind of where I try to pull my energy and say, how can we help impact change as a white woman, as a white family, to be able to do things differently? So I'm very much leaning more towards the hopeful, but still feel very saddened by dynamics still.
Yeah, so a lot of commonality, I would say, for me, anxious, because been in this space as an HR professional for years. I mean, I've been in HR 34 years. So anxious because we're still seeming to have to fight the same kind of fights even since back then, but hopeful because, like Carla had said, a lot of momentum, right? Coming into this space after the George Floyd incident, right? It seemed like there was a whole lot of momentum after that. That seemed to be the catalyst for a lot of what we're seeing today. So let's speak about that, particularly for my white panelists on board. That seemed to be the big catalyst that kind of woke a lot of white people up. What would you say for yourself? Lois, start with you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. But I think the thing for me, so I'll be 60 this year. And I was always under that impression that civil rights was taken care of. It was all done. That was how I was taught. And I live in the world of being a helper. And so I was asleep. I admit it. I'm a very spiritual person, but for some reason, I just didn't see the suffering of your whole community. And so I think it was the trifecta of first it was Ahmaud Arbery, then Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. And I think that we were home. We were still because of coronavirus. And then we saw 1, 2, 3, and it was like, holy cow, what's going on?
Yeah.
That's what I've been hearing in my community, but that is especially true for me.
Good. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, Lois. Tori, how about you?
I would agree. I echo what Lois said. I watch the news, and I guess I've been asleep. I don't see it often in my own community. I've learned since then from Michelle that it continues. It's just much more hidden and under the radar. And I do think that what sparked moment was that we're all home. And you know, it was one more thing that we're all dealing with. And it just kind of, it was too much. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's what I felt. It's too much. And we kind of had time and space a little bit to,
Yeah.
you know, deal with it since we were home.
Yeah. Yeah. Jordan or Lisa, anything you want to add to that that's different or pretty much similar?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jordan.
I would say that I've spent a lot of my life hiding behind my proximity to Black people and saying, or at least thinking and believing in myself that I'm not a part of the problem. Look at all of the Black people around me who I love and who are dear to me. And yeah, it was amazing how much of a catalyst these events have been for myself in shaking that. I had started to come to that realization, but it helps a lot living under the same roof as Andrea, and um, and just sharing in everything that she's been going through as well, and then realizing like, why aren't I going through this? Why aren't I feeling these things? What's wrong with me? How disconnected from this am I?
Yeah.
So,
and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Lisa, how about you? Anything different?
The only thing I would add is I think not only has it created kind of this very different conversation, a lot of people talking about it, I found even for just family situations, it created an opportunity to have a very different level discussion about race relations and what's going on, and conversations that I really honestly never had with my husband or my son or even my father-in-law. And to me, that they actually were looking to listen, which I think is a really important thing that, you know, as we kind of go through this conversation, I'll share more of how can we spend more time listening, to learn, to understand, to appreciate. And I found that my family was much more in a listening mode than in a judgment mode. And so to me, that's why I feel hopeful that maybe more people will listen and therefore then do things differently from there. So that's why I feel like excited. I know that sounds like a weird word, but I feel excited that this has created some momentum, that maybe things really will change now. And that's how I feel very positive and optimistic.
Good. And I agree. I think this time that we've been home have allowed all of us to kind of step back and really observe and listen more, which is, you know, in my mind, the reason why we've probably seen more action than we have before, because people were still, right? So what I want to do now is start to move into different segments of this conversation, realizing that this topic of anti-racism does impact us in various parts of our lives, right? The workplace, church, as well as in our community, in our neighborhood, and just through personal relationships. So I'm going to move you all to the green room, with the exception of Carla and Lisa. All right, ladies. So when you hear the term anti-racism, what comes to mind for you?
So for me, I think about anti anything is the active opposition of whatever the anything is. So when I think about anti racism, I think about actively taking steps to ensure that racism, or at least its harmful effects, are minimized, and would love to say eradicated. But while I am optimistic, I am realistic. And so I think about what are steps and things that individuals and or corporations can do to minimize the effects of racism.
And we are, for those of you in the watching live, we are talking about the workplace in this segment. So thank you, Carla, for sharing that. Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit slightly different. When I think about anti-racism, I do agree that it's about being against racism. But to me, the difference is a lot of people say, oh, I'm anti-racist or I'm not a racist. Well, those are words. Words can be said many, many times in many
Yeah.
different ways. It's actions. So when I hear the word anti-racism, yes, it's about against, but then to me, it's about how do you match some of those words with actions that support that statement. So it does have the same definition, but I see it as different because it's unfortunately a lot of people can say things easily, but not necessarily do the right things.
Yeah, you have to have the action with the words to your
Exactly.
point, or else it's meaningless. Lisa, let's talk a little bit about the role of HR in this space.
It's interesting because I have kind of two points of view on this. I think about HR playing a very critical role in corporations, right, in the workplace, to be able to help leaders and employees, one, help find their voice, help educate and understand, help them ensure that we're having fair practices in the workplace. So whether it be about hiring or promotions or advancements or compensation or whatever it may be. And so we have that kind of role. But at the same time, I think it's important that HR is there to help coach and guide both employees and leaders, more importantly, to do the right things, right? To behave in the ways that are necessary. Because unfortunately, at least my experience has been, HR is seen as, well, oh, HR is making us take, unconscious bias, or HR is making us go through this program, or HR is requiring me to hire somebody who's diverse. And it's seen as I need to be compliant versus I'm committed to making change because I actually want diverse teams around me. So I think there's a really fine balance for HR to play the role to help facilitate and help hopefully influence behavior change and mindset change. But it has to be the leader and the employees who are really doing that, opposed to it being something that is compliance related, opposed to I'm truly committed to the change. So HR does have an important role to play, but quite frankly, in my mind, I think it's the leaders and the employees who have a very, very important role. The leaders to model the behaviors that are required, to really make sure they're demanding what's necessary for fairness and equity, and employees to fight the fight, because it is a fight. Employees are having a real hard time with this right now, and not give up. And so how can HR continue to be that voice with leaders who may not get it? So that's kind of how I see HR's role in this in a dual way.
Yeah, it has to be a business case to do it, right?
Yes.
It can't, as you said, it can't feel like it's something we're making people
Exactly.
do. It needs to be part of the culture. And let me go back to the first question. Look, I went past my own question. Why do you guys think it took so long for corporations? Because it feels like, in corporations, and many of us have worked in more than one corporation, right? Why did it take so long for us to really just kind of stand up and finally seem like we're paying the attention that we need to? Because these things have happened before, right? So what's the catalyst for change now? Carla?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with it's not an easy issue, right? As you said at the beginning, 400 years. So this is racism is something that has plagued this country since its very beginning. And so even with the most recent events, it's a multi-layered issue. It's an issue that extends beyond the walls of the corporation. It is about what people bring into the organization, right? Culture is a function of the people who are living and working in the organization. So it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And so I think some organizations were kind of paralyzed, like, what do I do? But I think because these incidents that we talked about were so present, right? And we're all at home and everybody was watching, corporations had no choice but to respond. And so I think I think corporations at times kind of get stuck between this idea of it's the right thing to do, and then what is the business benefit, right? Or what is the how does this result in improved sales or what have you? And I think at the end of the day that corporations have to understand that it's both. It's absolutely the right thing to do when we think about corporate reputation, but it's also a business benefit. More and more our country, our world are becoming more and more diverse. The consumers, doesn't matter what type of industry that you are in, the consumer base is becoming more and more diverse. And so having a diverse set of employees that feel like their voice matters, their perspective matters, is important to an organization or any kind of corporation being successful and meeting the needs of whatever the consumer base is. So I think it's just one of those things where, as you said, all of us, corporations included, taking a step back and thinking through how do we get out of the middle of this idea of right thing to do and the business benefit, and acknowledging that it's really both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks. Lisa,
Exactly.
anything to add there?
Yeah, I think Carla positioned it really well. I think I would say the frustration part of why it takes so long or why it hasn't been focused on as much is really a lot of employees and leaders think that silence is indifference, like you don't care as an organization. And so you wonder that is going to impact sales, right? That is going to impact employee morale. That is going to impact retention. That is going to impact your hiring because, you know, if I'm an employee or if I'm a somebody who's looking to go to a company, I want to know that company actually has the same value set as I do. I don't care whether this is a US thing that's going on or not, because a lot of companies I have heard and conversations that I've had is, well, it's more US, it's not global, it's not a global issue,
Right.
which is just, you know, shocking beyond belief. But that's some of the stuff that happens. And I think this has put such a spotlight on the fact that this is not just a US issue. This isn't about what's happening in the US. This is about what's going on globally. And to me, that's why I think there has been the change to have much more of a conversation about it. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Lisa, I'm gonna pivot a little bit and then we'll go
Sure.
get back to more about what the corporation should be doing.
Okay.
Talk about your journey, because you have always been, since I've known you, been an ally and advocate to so many people. Talk a little bit about your journey and it's just personal journey in this space and how you came to
Yeah,
be where you are right
sure.
now.
So I guess the way I think about it is I have been fortunate enough where I have worked on diverse teams, and I have always found that the more diverse the team, whether it be about background, education, but more importantly, gender or race, ethnicity, you know, sexual orientation, I find that those teams have the better outcomes, right? Whether it be about morale of the team, whether it be about productivity of the team. And so that's always been in my experience. So I always want to surround myself with more diverse people because you have more challenging conversations. But what I would say, if you're asking me more about my experience in terms of being kind of an advocate and an ally, I have to say, Bev Morgan is someone who was very impactful. So Bev Morgan is someone who I used to work with, who came and sat down with me and had a one-on-one with me when I got into a role that was playing a lead US role for HR. So I was asked to do this for the organization that I was working at. And I remember we were having a great conversation about talent in HR, et cetera. And she said to me, she said, Lisa, how many diverse talent do you really know in HR? And I gave her a couple of names, and it was like probably 5 people on my hand. And she goes, do you know how many diverse talent we actually have in HR? And I honestly, I was like, no, I don't. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I should know that. There's like 400 people in HR. I don't know what the diverse population. And she said to me, she goes, there aren't actually that many. So that's the first problem. And she said, and the second thing is that there are so many people that are talented, that are diverse in the HR organization that are going nowhere because no one's looking out for them or understanding their capabilities. And I remember my first reaction, quite frankly, was, Bev, that can't be true. I don't believe that. Why would you say that? And I asked her for example. So I was defensive. I will be honest with you. And she's like, Lisa, I just challenge you to take a moment to get to know a few people who you don't know. And I did. And I really thought about it because I said, there's something there. Bev wouldn't just say this to me. And I started to meet people. And I became horrified by the number of diverse talent in the organization, in just HR, right? Let alone the business that I was supporting, right? So my journey really started in HR, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to have a very deeper conversation within the business. And horrified because there were so many unbelievably talented employees that had so much experience that were at a more junior level than they probably should have been, that I said, this is unacceptable. And so I just, it became a passion of mine to say, how can I make connections for individuals to meet with other leaders in the organization? How might I give them an opportunity working on my team, even if it's a project, something to give them exposure, to give them development, even if it was just mentorship or sponsorship. And my greatest joy was to seeing people flourish and thrive, and seeing them accomplish some great things, whether it be promotions or getting that great project that they were looking for. And so I really actually owe it to Bev. So while I knew the innate benefit of it, it was a conversation with somebody that, quite frankly, as I said earlier, about listening. And I listened to her, and my initial reaction is, that can't be true. But I'm like, I need to understand this further. And I did, and it changed who I am. I truly believe that. I truly believe that was my moment.
Yeah. And I was a recipient of all that allyship and advocacy, and I thank you for that.
You know, I love you.
Yeah.
Me
You're
too.
amazing.
That's why I'm sitting over here smiling.
I know,
I'm
we're
like,
both sitting here like, we love you, Lisa. But you did, and I think, one of the things, to be honest, I think earlier on, when you think about HR, we really didn't talk about a lot of personal things. You were told to kind of keep that stuff to the side. So when you came to work, you came to work.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I do believe, as leaders, you do need to get to know your employees, right?
Exactly.
And this is the change that I'm seeing over the course of these years, where we're understanding that people are really bringing their whole selves to work. And as part of that, me as an African American female, I'm bringing that to the workplace, right? So Carla, let's talk a little bit about you. Because I think we both have been recipients of allyship and advocacy.
Absolutely.
And talk about the importance of that and what that has done for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, certainly in my career, I have benefited from great mentors, but more so than anything, sponsorship. And that's the first thing that I ask. And even as I pay it forward and talk to individuals when they sit with me, I say, so who is your sponsor? Who is speaking on your behalf when you are not in the room? And oftentimes I find, particularly with people of color, that they're not sure who that is, and the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And so, as Lisa said, there is an individual in my career, early on in my career, and it's interesting. And we'll talk about this when you ask the question, what can corporations do? So when I first started in pharma, the day I got to the company I was working with, they paired me up with a mentor, a senior level person in the organization. I had never met her. She had never met me, but that relationship paid dividends. She taught me about corporate culture before I had to have any sort of aha or incidents or step into something with the unwritten rules. When I was looking for a new opportunity, she's the one that established networks for me and allowed me to navigate and make my way into other parts of the organization, which is where I ultimately met one of my strongest career supporters and advocates that really took me under his wings and taught me a lot about not only myself, but about how to thrive in corporate America. I am a first generation college graduate, first generation. There aren't very many people in my family that work in corporations like me. So there's not necessarily someone that I could look to in my personal life when I needed advice and trying to figure out how to navigate corporate waters, because there are many unwritten rules. And when you don't have someone there who can help you to walk through those unwritten rules, it can be very challenging. So fortunately for me, we were paired up in this diverse reverse mentoring type program where we had an opportunity to get to know each other. And I would say what was most important in that relationship was vulnerability. And not just me being vulnerable, but he also had to be vulnerable, because there were things that he didn't know about a young African American female that he had to lean in and be comfortable being uncomfortable. And which I also tell people, I had to be comfortable admitting things that I didn't know and asking for help. I also had to be comfortable in spaces where he not only gave me praise, but also gave me critique and
Mhm.
honest feedback and critique, and being open to that, which really built the relationship that we still have 20 years, or nearly 20 years of this relationship. And again, it's been a mutually beneficial relationship, but it was one that we both had to be vulnerable with each other, and recognize that there were things that we needed.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, going back to what you say around sponsorship, sponsorship is so critical because it is sponsors that are the ones that often we say take the risk or get
Mhm.
people to take the risk on you. It's sponsors that lean into their networks and say, hey, give this individual a try. And they put their names out there and their reputation out there for you, because it's as much as what you know as it is who you know.
Yeah.
And so sponsorship is critical to that, and certainly has been a big part of my success.
So let's talk a little bit about two topics which I think play hand in hand with this thing called sponsorship, mentorship. And it's the two topics: unconscious bias and microaggressions, right? So, Lisa, let's talk a little bit about unconscious bias. Um, what's your advice around this in terms of, for leaders in terms of this? Because we know we are very comfortable with people who are like us, which
Sure.
oftentimes will prevent us from really getting to know someone and also providing the support, like Carla mentioned, right? Support that we do need, all of us need, in terms of advocacy and allyship, but particularly people of color.
Sure. Yeah, it's for leaders, I think I come back to a place where there has to be a level of trust in the relationship with the leader and the employees. And if that isn't there, I think it is very hard to have the honest conversations, because there's always the fear in the employees' mind of, well, gosh, can I have the honest conversation with them? But it is incumbent upon the leader to build that level of trust and to have the honest conversation that says, you know what, I I may not realize either things that I'm saying or doing that are affecting you or this team personally, professionally, and I need to know that to be a better leader myself. And so I'm asking that the team, right, provide that feedback to me, or let's have what we used to call in our company inclusion dialogues. Right? So let's have a conversation about, how does it feel to work in this company, or how does it feel to be a part of this team? When have you felt, unappreciated? When have you felt, slighted in some way? And there's various words that can be used that create an environment where people feel safe to have that conversation that allows them to speak their truths. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, to allow others to understand and learn and listen so that they too can change their behaviors, right? Because that's what it's all about. So, unconscious bias, right? Meaning you're not consciously doing it, you're unconsciously doing it until it's brought to you, then you can't change that behavior. So it's super important for leaders to create that environment, and until they do that, they won't have the true conversations. And it doesn't have to be just in a team setting. I always encourage leaders to have it just as a one-on-one, right, with their employee, and say, like, Michelle, tell me more about yourself. Tell me more about your background. What are you most interested in? It just, people have this whole stigma, unfortunately, when you think about a boss and an employee relationship, that it has to be, I'm the boss and you're the employee, and
Right.
you can't be quote unquote friends. And and it's not like you're best buddies, you have to be best buddies, but it's about getting to know the person as an individual and their experiences and what motivates them and what engages them, so that they can be their best. That's why I love your company and your name, right? So,
Yeah,
my best
yeah,
every day, right?
yeah.
How can you as a leader ensure you're getting the best out of your team each and every day? And the same goes for their colleagues and others that they work with. So that's what I would encourage leaders to do, and how they can make change. Anybody who's worried about it, just start the conversation saying, you know what, I don't want to say anything stupid or do or offend in any way. Can we just talk? And I want to
Mhm.
learn. I want to understand. Help me.
Mhm.
And I, I'm willing to bet you everyone will say, oh, okay. All right,
Mhm.
let's have the conversation.
Mhm.
And
And
and I
so it's just taking that step. That's
Yeah,
all.
Yeah, go ahead, Carla.
No, I was going to say, I think that part is so critical, right? The willingness to lean into the conversation when you don't know the answer or the outcome. As leaders, oftentimes we enter conversations having already played out, well, if it goes this way, then I'll do this. If it goes this way, I'll do that. And this is a topic that you can't predict the outcome. So I think entering the conversation in the space of, I'm sure I'm not going to have all the answers. Please assume positive intent, which is the other thing I tell people when somebody leans in and has the courage to have that conversation, assume positive intent and then allow the conversation to go to wherever the conversation needs to go. But I think as much as employees are fearful of those conversations, leaders are as fearful, although we hold leaders to a higher standard and they have to overcome that fear and have those conversations. But I do think that fear and being uncomfortable because I might say the wrong thing holds people back from having those conversations that are so crucial.
Yeah. Well, we can go on and on about the workplace segment. I realize we've been going for a couple of minutes. So just lastly, I think you really answered this question. What do you say to leaders who are ready to just move forward? Because I've heard that too. We heard early on, right? Momentum was there, and now it seems to be wavering a little bit. So what would you say to a leader who's not stepping into this space right now?
I would say that
snap out of it.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely essential, right?
Yeah.
Your employees need you to. Your business is relying on it.
Exactly.
You can't ignore your employees any more than you can ignore your customers. So it's something that you have to get over and just engage.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you too. I will bring you back. I'm going to move on to our next segment. I'm going to move you guys in the green room. All right. So next up, I have Tori and Lois. Tori, I'll start with you because you and I, we live in the same subdivision.
Yeah.
And we were brought together years ago, as I had shared with some of the other panelists before we got on, through a committee, the dreaded HOA committee, where we were trying to figure out what we can do to stop people from speeding through our neighborhoods. And then we got reunited more recently. So let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what happened, we can call it like sign gate or whatever we want to call it. So I guess it was a couple months ago, maybe in June, a friend in the neighborhood had posted that she'd seen a yard sign and it said, "Hate has no home here," which immediately struck me. Our neighborhood, in my opinion, is fairly diverse.
Yeah.
Not, it's diverse, somewhat diverse. But my the immediate 5 houses around our home are all people of color. We have a Vietnamese family, a family from Nigeria, and a Muslim family. And I don't know any of them well, but I wanted to put that out in my yard and just say, hate has no home here. I want them to know that we supported them, we saw them, and that we were allies. That was purely my intent. However, I'm kind of cheap, and the friend in the neighborhood that posted the sign said she wanted to get one, and I wanted to get one, but if you got like a bulk order, you didn't have to pay shipping. So this all really happened because I didn't want to pay shipping. So Courtney said, let's see if we can get some other people to order it. So I just put it on our neighborhood Facebook group. I was like, we want to order these signs. Is anybody interested? And I think we got about 30 or 35 people to order the signs, and we ordered about, I think, 45 signs as a group. I know you ordered a bunch. And so we bought these 45 signs, and I got to reconnect with you and met a few other neighbors. That was really wonderful. So I kind of thought naively that that would be it.
Yeah.
We put these lovely signs out and everybody would be happy and, you know, it would be nice. I love what Carla just said about assuming positive intent. I wrote that down.
Yeah.
And I always assume positive intent, and my intent is always positive, but much thanks to you, I realized that that was not the attitude of our whole neighborhood.
Yeah. And what I had shared with you, it was funny because I remember the night you posted the request. And it was the night that a lot of communities were protesting. They had a lot of different people out downtown protesting across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and we're in a quiet town, right? Wake Forest is very quiet. But I remember hearing helicopters that night. And I remember just going to the page because I'm not used to hearing helicopters, right?
No.
Especially where we live. And I just said, let me just go to the page and let me see. Maybe someone can say what's happening. And I remember some of the comments, and they were kind of off-putting to me, to say the least, right? I remember one saying, "Freedom at last," and some other stuff. And there was something deep inside of me that just couldn't get from this feeling of, were some of the comments racial in nature, right? Although the person didn't say it, right? The undertone was.
Well, and do you want to share what the helicopters were?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Somebody said they were just test flights, right?
No,
is what I heard. What you hear?
They were headed from the military base down south to Washington, D.C. To help quell the protests up there.
Yeah. So it was what I had thought it was, right? So I'm glad. So no, I didn't realize. I remember somebody said they were testing and stuff like that, but even more so, right? Where my gut was just, I mean, I was really upset. So when I got to the page, I started to respond, and something said, "Michelle, don't respond because you're going to respond out of anger," right? So I held off, and then I saw your sign, and I remember posting something about, I'm really pleased that you posted this, right? And that you feel strongly about doing this. People who look like me see you and we appreciate you. And then I said, and for those of you who make very snide remarks, I see you too. And we're watching.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me, I felt relief from doing that, but you just kind of made me have this sense of just humanity, that everybody in the world is not thinking the same way as so many other people, that could not separate the protests, right, from the people who were rioting, right? The peaceful protests from the people who were rioting. So I really appreciated that. And I know when we had when I picked up my sign, you and I got into a conversation, and I remember I was tearing up coming to pick my sign. But let's talk about that that day, because you and your family have been doing a lot. So talk about your journey.
Okay, I was gonna say, I remember you came and sat out on my porch, and I got teared up too. So do you want to skip on to my journey?
Let's talk about
who's that, your cat, Michelle?
Nah, that's not
No, that's mine. She's going crazy.
She wants to talk. So my journey with racism, I was raised, like you and I talked about how quite a lot of people, white people in the South, are raised in a racist family. I was not. I was raised in Southern California. I may very naively believe that it's not as racist as the South. I think here there more heat was put on Latinos, but I grew up in a very white very white community, went to very white schools, but I was always aware, you know, I was aware of racism, but I never saw it or certainly experienced it. I didn't know anybody that had experienced racism, so I was aware of it, but had never been impacted. For college, I went up to Los Angeles, and I graduated right after the '92 riots. So the riots with Rodney King and all that, Roosevelt Denny, was really eye-opening. Reflecting as an adult, it certainly impacted my life, but I was fortunate enough to have a roommate that lived nearby, and we left downtown and stayed in a very white, affluent conclave south of Los Angeles. So as an adult, I see my privilege. I see how I was in that situation, but could easily get away and escape. And I've always had a heart to help people. I'm a helper, like Lois said. And I also have a history of getting into good trouble, which I know my husband's watching right now and is laughing. He's always, what are you doing? But I was a teacher. And so when I graduated after the riots, I got a job in a South Central neighborhood and taught there for a couple of years. So my experience, I have about 12 years experience teaching in low socioeconomic areas, primarily students of color. And I saw as a teacher, the people, primarily white teachers, but certainly I've worked with a good, mix of teachers. But I saw the teachers who were really working in blood, sweat, and tears, helping children who lived in extremely difficult circumstances, but working to educate them and support them. So I saw that more positive side, but I also saw the institutional racism, the disparity in the educational system. I've seen that, and then do you want me to get in with I'm talking. I told you I keep talking.
Yeah. Go ahead. Talk about your journey, because I mean, you and your family are really. I mean, one thing that really enlightened me about you is you had shared that your children really have been pushing you and have been a catalyst too, right?
Right.
More recently, of you guys really doing things together, learning together. So, want to talk about that?
Yeah. So that part, I'd say I've always been interested in different people. I see myself as so boring and vanilla and basic. I'm intrigued by people who have different experiences from me. And I know, so I've all through school and stuff, I would seek out different experiences. And I don't really know that it's been a journey with my family. It's just like my value, I guess, as a family. I know, when I took my kids several years ago up to DC, and it was a priority to go see the African American Museum, because I want to learn more about other people. More personally, with my children especially, we have a beautiful soul. She's a white woman that works at our church. I've known her for several years, and she has always worked for racial equity, racial justice. And she kind of ignited, I'd say, a couple of years ago in my family this interest. Several years ago, she took a group of youth from our church, actually from our whole diocese, down to Wilmington, and they learned about the Wilmington coup of 1898. And that, just hearing about that and learning about that, really, I think as an adult, kind of brought me more into an understanding of racism and the systemic racism in our country. So that kind of got us more into it. And I just, like, my children have always, you know, we just are around different kind of people. I remember my daughter in high school also went to a predominantly white school, but of her three best friends, one was Black, one was Indian, subcontinent Indian, and one was white. And there was just a beautiful group. And so that's just how I raised my family.
Yeah.
And then most recently, we've been watching a lot of movies about the LA riots, and, you know, just trying to become more educated. I think as an adult, I'm learning. I would say I'm not a racist, but I'm learning what it is to be anti-racist, and instead of being passive about it, to work against it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm in my journey.
Yeah, and the thing that I like is you have shared with me is this continuous journey to learn, right? And I know you've asked me through conversations we've had in emails, you know, send me resources or sources. I know you guys watched 13th together as a family. And you know what I appreciate about you is, and your family, is that you are continuing your journey in learning, right? Which I appreciate so much. It's not just a, you know, a one-time thing. And like you said, very involved in the church, and you're doing it at the church as well. Lois, how about you, your journey?
Well, I was raised in what I'm going to call a white bubble. I was raised in rural Pennsylvania on a dairy farm, and everyone around me was white. Everyone in our school district was white. There was one family that was Black, and I just thought that everybody was like me. I was the epitome of white centering. And I had to look that term up when that first time I heard that. I didn't understand what that meant, but I do now. But my first really foray into even being around people of color and Black people was my first career as a respiratory therapist and working at a hospital, a level 1 trauma center here in Northwest Pennsylvania. And again, it didn't occur to me anything about racism. So my journey really to allyship and advocacy is new. I'm just going to say I do healing work, and I'm a very passionate and compassionate soul. And so when I woke up to the brutality and the inequality, the first thing I had to move through was shame. I had to release the shame that I felt that I didn't know. And then I had to start learning. Like I said about white centering, Google was my friend. I had no idea what BIPOC meant. Right. I had no idea what systemic racism was. I had no idea what white privilege was. And I just started learning. And then I started listening. I started listening to people that I already trust, and who are they listening to? And then I started listening to who they were listening to, and I was introduced to more beautiful Black voices. And so I started listening and learning, and now I'm sharing, but I'm sharing only within my circle of influence. You know, I already have people that I have a circle of influence, whether they're my clients, you know, as the personal development coach, or my students as a teacher, whether it's my Facebook friends, either personally or on my business page. There are plenty of people, and truly, I'll just be completely transparent. I would say all but maybe 3 or 4, 5 are white. Right. And many of them are like me. Many of them are living in a white bubble. And so what I have discovered is anti-racism really is, and I'm going to agree with Carla and Lisa, is about action. Right. So I found a few, you know, I believe in the universe. I believe in spirit. I believe in God. And I believe that things are put in front of me at the right time for the right reason. And I found in just these last few months some beautiful teachers. And one of them I've learned she has a very large Facebook group called What Is Mine to Do? And her name is Tracy Brown. And I have taken already a 5-day challenge from her, and that helped me to understand what is mine to do. Small actions, such as calling people in when I see people being racist, and amplifying Black voices. Medium actions, I have emailed more people, prosecutors, judges, my council people. I've really increased my actions that way. And that's been out of my comfort zone. But I find that faith without works is dead. Knowledge without action goes nowhere, right? So it doesn't help me to read all the books if I don't do anything with it. And then it's just been a matter of learning to be willing to be uncomfortable. This is all new to me, and I'm used to knowing. I'm used to knowing what I'm talking about, and I don't. But I have the heart for people, and I want to be in part of what's going to change, that we're all going to be valued. Everyone will have value, and the world will work for everybody.
Yeah, I think, like you said, and many of the other panelists have said too, it is action, right? Because we can all sit home and wish this thing will go away, but it is about educating yourself, and it is about taking action. And I think even more importantly, taking action that's comfortable for you, right? 'Cause
Sure.
everybody's not going to react the same way and do the same things, and that's what I love about just people, because we're all different, and we're just going to do it in a way that feels comfortable, but you cannot not do anything, right?
Sure.
I know you and I talked more recently. You told me the story about just how even stepping out there, you've gotten some negative reactions too,
I
right?
have.
Talk a little bit about that, Lois.
So one of the things I did as a small action is I planted a black and white sign out front, Black Lives Matter. And first I want to say that we never know exactly how our actions are going to be taken, or also what will happen. So the good part of that sign is I was out gardening, and it was early June, mid-June, and this little gaggle of, I would say, middle school age boys, you can hear them coming, laughing, music, bikes, all that, came up, and it was a mixed group of children, boys mostly, and came around the corner, and this one little beautiful Black boy said, they think my life matters. And he really meant it, right? And he turned to one of his white friends and said, "Do you think my life matters?" And the kid kind of punched him and goes, "Of course," and they went on. So that was really powerful. But also, with that sign planted there, the first thing that happened, which I was both a little shocked and a little sad, is I received a handwritten, or a letter in the mail, handwritten to my address. And it was a very vile letter, all about how me placing that sign out there meant all sorts of certain things, and how dare I, and have you thought about, and it was very clearly and very radical religious based organization. And then I have what I call the ones, the All Life Matters. So I can, my home is very near the street, and I can count at least 10 in this short amount of time, if not more, people will all hear shouting All Life Matters out their car windows. And I had to at first get used to the idea. I had to understand why. What is it? Why are people saying that? And I feel like the thing that really helps me, and if I am able to have a one-on-one conversation with someone who believes that, and I value all life, that is absolutely true. But it somehow white people hear that when you post a Black Lives Matter sign, that you mean Black Lives Matter more or only Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Where that is not it at all. We're just saying we need to pay attention. There are things happening here to Black people right now that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. You said that beautifully. And I mean, I think that's probably the statement that gets the most debate from a lot of people. Would you agree to Tori, right? Because people do think when you say that Black Lives Matter, you mean the other lives don't. And it really is about this point in time with all the injustices that are going on. Black lives do need to matter too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And people just take that statement and take it to a whole nother place where it just really isn't meant to be or to go.
Like Lois said, it's not exclusionary, it's inclusionary.
Exactly. Well, thank you, ladies, for this segment, and I will bring you back in a few moments. Next, I want to go to Pastor Ed. Thank you for hanging in there with me.
Oh yeah, of course.
And we've heard some religious references earlier in terms of the church, and one of the reasons that I selected you to be on this panel is because you do go to a multiracial church just like me. And I think, to bring a pastor here that's in an all-white church or one that's in an all-black church, to me just did not make sense because you're not experiencing it, right, day to day. So let's talk a little bit about church and this anti-racism movement. So tell me about your experience.
My experience with the current movement has not been as positive as I would have thought, being a pastor and being within a church. I spoke out immediately after I saw the video, just with random posts, of my disgust, of my tired and me being tired and exhausted by what is happening. And started sharing, things that was near and dear to my heart that may, make people feel uncomfortable who are white. But it needed to be, it's truth. You can't hide from truth. How people will hide behind Martin Luther King's peaceful stance, but yet they completely ignore that while they were walking peacefully, they were still getting bitten by dogs, and that fire hydrants were still being, water hoses, they were still getting hosed down, they were still getting beaten, bones was being broken, people were still dying, and that Christians were stating and sharing these posts how the protesters were mobs and they were, thugs and hoodlums and these ratchet people, these evil people who I dare you to stand up for justice. I dare you how dare you riot? How dare you do those things and damage businesses and all those things? And while I don't condone violence at all, I understand the mental state and emotional state that George Floyd's death put people in. Mm-hmm. And what I did not see white evangelicals and white Christians out there on the front lines praying for those people, helping those people deal with those emotions. I didn't see any of them who would dare call them a mob and call them a threat, but say they love Jesus. I didn't see anyone hosting prayer walks. I didn't see anyone going down into the protests and being that voice for people that needed that reasoning and that rationality, even in those moments. But yet I saw them condemning them. And I didn't believe that that's how our God will respond to this moment of injustice. And so I spoke out a little bit more deeper and a little harder, and I got a ton of pushback. Within that, I think me and my wife, we share an account. She looked at it, we lost 135 friends during this, and predominantly white, all white. If I'm being honest with you, all white. And going to a multiracial church was a struggle, because I remember that a lot of this came from people who I ministered to. I prayed over them. I prayed over their families. I've connected with their families. I've been in their house. They've been in my house, or I pray with them on the phone, or I pray with them on a Sunday morning. And yet I didn't realize that they had this level of racism in their heart in the midst of that. And so that dove me into speaking out against some things within the church. And I'll be honest with you, I've not gotten the same response from people on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
The hugs you used to get, the love you used to get, being in a multicultural church. I'm not getting that from my white brothers and sisters like I used to. And that's incredibly sad.
Yeah, and I remember, so I go to Elevation Church, the pastor Stephen Furtick, and I remember he met with Pastor Ed Gray, and it's like, you can't say you love God and you don't love people.
Oh yeah.
Right. And that's all people.
All
right. And when you're having a group of individuals hurting, as Christians, to hear some of the things that we've heard. I remember going to another church in the neighborhood, and I remember even the Kaepernick, when Kaepernick kneeled, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I remember this pastor saying, he was embarrassed by the number of people who had pretty much berated him and called him all kinds of names, but they were right here in the church. So let's talk about this topic, because I've heard it too, right? This topic of, Christians being in the church saying that they can't be racist because they're Christians. Talk a little bit about that.
So one thing people have to understand about being Christian is you can't take Christ out of being Christian. And if you can't take Christ out of being Christian, you can't take the character of Christ out of being a Christian. And the character of Christ is one that not just loves all people, but he ingrains himself in the lives of people. And so I challenge pastors all the time who say that they want a diverse church, and they pray for a diverse church, and they work towards a diverse church. And when you look at their life isn't diverse. Mm-hmm. You want a diverse church, but your life isn't diverse. You don't have diverse relationships. You don't go out your way to build diverse relationships. There's a difference from building diverse relationships and just building connections. I can have 15 Black people, 15 white people, 3 Indian people, 2 Asian people in my phone, but that doesn't mean that I have a diverse life. I got a diverse contact list.
Right.
And there's a difference.
Yeah.
And so when you start saying things like there's no way I can be a racist because I'm a Christian, you have to take an audit of your prejudice, your preference, and your personal life. And you have to say, are any of these reflecting the character of Christ? And people came against Jesus all the time because he would hang with sinners. Why? It's because people didn't like, or they didn't want to associate themselves with that level of what you'll call disgust with people. They felt like that was dirty, that was unclean to be labeled or deemed as a sinner. But yet Jesus ate with them. Mm-hmm. Jesus hung with them. That was his ministry. That was his crew. He rode with those people, and he selected a ton of them to be his disciples, 12 to be exact. And so when you say you can't be racist because you're a Christian, that's inaccurate. Because you definitely can be racist, because not every Christian has fully committed their life over to Jesus. And I'll end with this particular point. There's 2 types of people, and I believe this is exposed it. 2 types of Christians. I believe this whole thing has exposed it. There's Christians who believe in Jesus. They believe in God. They believe in him, but they don't believe him. So you got to believe. You can believe in him, and that may lead to salvation. But when you believe him, you don't just believe that he's good. You believe in his commands, you believe in his instructions, you believe in his word, and you believe in his promises. And so the word of God said, love thy neighbor. Well, you got to understand what love is. Love biblically is patient, is kind. It don't dishonor people. It doesn't delight in evilness. It stands up for truth. It always trusts. It always perseveres. It always honors. And so you can say, yeah, I love all people because I'm a Christian, but yet when someone speaks out against who you voted for, or when someone speaks out against, someone says Black Lives Matter, but in your heart, you're still holding on to your American history and not giving away to your Christian now lineage that you live, what happens is that you start showing people that you're not fully committed to being a Christian. Right. Because no one's saying that all lives don't matter. They're just saying Black lives matter too. And as a Christian, you should say the exact same thing, because they do matter, especially if they're the ones that's being marginalized, especially if they're the ones being held back, or justice is not being served unequally to them versus someone else. And when you see a man on live TV, on a video, lose his life to exact, and then you see Breonna Taylor, someone said the trifecta. Yeah. I don't know how in the world could you sit behind or sit in a church and not want to take action, but yet spew your political position or your whiteness in such a way that you completely ignore that you're first a Christian.
Yeah. Powerful words, and just reiterating what so many other people said. It is about your action, right? So talk about the action of a church and around race relations. What should churches be doing?
So a lot of people believe that church is the building. Mm-hmm. And while the organization of church is a building, the church of people is the body, is people. I'm the church, you're the church. And so I think if we're going to engage in relationships with one another and actually call each other brother and sisters, then the church, the body, we have to facilitate atmospheres where that happens. And so there's things that if you have an all-white church or you have an all-black church, well, if you only serve or do outreach in all Black neighborhoods and all white neighborhoods, then you are already perpetuating the problem. Because if you're a white church, why not go serve in a Black neighborhood or Indian neighborhood? Why not go and serve in these so that people can be exposed to these things, because some of them are living in their bubble. Yeah. And as a church, you should do your best to ensure that you create an atmosphere where your church is exposed to all different types of people, all different types of background, all different types of situation, because it will be ignorance of a church to claim that they lived this life and they never got an opportunity to expose themselves to another race of people, when we're living in a world where everyone's everywhere. And so that's one of the things that churches can do, is you need to take an audit of your own congregation. And you need to say, well, if we're predominantly white and we're predominantly Black, then we need to begin to do our best to merge this thing. And we need to begin to reach out to other communities that are not like us. And sometimes it doesn't take you changing your style of worship. It just takes you stepping outside the four walls into a different environment, in a different atmosphere, building different relationships. I also think one of the things the churches need to do is they need to look at the top. Because I can have a congregation that has diversity, Black, white, Spanish, Indian, but my board, the top leadership, are all white. Yeah. And I said, when that happens, critical decisions that are made in moments like this with George Floyd, you have an all-white board that's speaking or sharing, we don't need to say much during this moment. Yeah. And what you're doing is you're damaging that opportunity that you have to bring people together or closer, but instead you don't want to take a stance because you're ignorant at the top. And
Yeah.
because you don't have no empathy at the top, or because there's no experience of this thing actually impacting your life at the top. So one of the things you got to do as pastors of churches is you got to look at your top leadership and start there. If there's no diversity there, then that's your number one start. You start there. And
Yeah.
other things you can do, I believe, within the churches, just don't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not a statement that you make on a Sunday. It's a lifestyle and a value that you have to ingrain in the culture of your church. And so most churches, you got to start adopting multicultural, multi-ethnic values. That means that we're not going to build a church that's diverse just on Sunday. We wanted to build a church that's going to be diverse on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because we know that Sunday is still one of the most segregated days of the week.
It is.
And so when churches are trying to bring people together on a Sunday, and you bring that diversity on a Sunday, it looks beautiful. Michelle, you know that. It looks
I know. I've
beautiful.
seen it. I live it. I'm in a church like that. So yeah.
It fuels you. It just motivates you. It's like you get a glimpse of heaven when you see that, and you get that hope that, man, we are doing good. And what happens is that a lot of the people then go back on Monday to their secluded circles.
Right. Yeah.
And we come together on Sunday, but then on Monday, we still don't have the relationships. We still don't have the exposure, and we are still not really making a difference in that way. So those are some things that I believe the church can do.
And you said a lot of what you said, it's the same for organizations, right? People see the diversity in the leadership levels, right? For them to believe that you're truly supporting what we're talking about in terms of anti-racism. So thank you, Pastor Ed.
Yes.
I'm going to bring up to the rear.
We're here.
Hey.
Hey. So, my beloved couple.
Yes.
Jordan, you talked a little bit about your experiences, just a little bit, right? Talk to me, because you guys got married 2 years ago. I think, as I heard you say earlier, you had people who you were engaging with, but probably weren't just as in tune with just the things, deeply in tune with the things that your friends may have been experiencing. So talk about your journey.
Yeah. So like Tori, I was born and raised in Southern California, but I moved to the rural South when I was 10. We moved to a small town, Murfreesboro, North Carolina, where I ended up going to school there in college. It's where I met Andrea. And I had grown familiar with existing in predominantly Black spaces from the time we moved to rural North Carolina, all the way through college. And I had really kind of taken that for granted. And I remember my time with Andrea when we first became interested in each other and we were courting each other. Something began to change in me, in that the more time I spent with this person and the more times that I was able to witness hurts or strengths or just these unique characteristics about her personality that were shaped by her being Black in America. And it opened up really intimate conversations that I had never had with any of my Black friends before. When you start a partnership, you get into the nitty gritty with some conversations. So, but to address, you were asking a question about the existing in a space where people weren't thinking the same way as me. Was that? I think being raised by Californians and living in rural North Carolina gave me a nice glimpse of different flavors of white people, I would say. And when I moved to Nashville after college, I was living with people who had never lived in the South before,
Okay.
and they thought Nashville was the South. And it's like, well, this is actually a large city on the border of the South, and there's flavors of the South here, but I feel like there's a lot of expectations or judgment that liberal West Coast white people have for white people in the South, not realizing that white people in the South have proximity. And while proximity isn't even close to everything, and it's not the be all end all, it certainly gives a perspective that others don't have. And one of the things that I've constantly been realizing about myself is the work within myself is never over. But I think I've probably carried on a bit too long for that intro.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But talk about your journey. Like, what prompted you to become, to get into the space of allyship and advocacy? When did you realize you were in that space?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that. I move myself away from I would like to consider myself an ally and absolutely an advocate. I think I'm also influenced by the generation that has spent a large part of their lives on social media.
Yeah.
And among young people, there has been stigma around people who are social justice warriors or people who are virtue signaling, that they position themselves as allies and advocates for social standing on. And that's one of the strange things that I was faced with most recently with all of the incidents, and this kind of balancing act of one, I'm not on social media a lot as is, and I kind of hid behind that for a while. But for young people, it is important to put your voice out there, because we exist in those spaces so much, that there's power in numbers. And I think I got to a place that I hadn't gotten to before, was I know my heart. I know that I can confront critique when I'm faced with it. I think having Andrea as my wife and really wonderful relationships with her family is kind of an unfair safety net for me, where I can use that as a superpower almost, of I can be vulnerable. I can open myself up to be critiqued by Black people, because I feel like I have this safety net. I have people who I care for, that love me, that know where my heart is, and have faith that I am growing, and then I'll continue to grow. So I would say that's been a huge momentum shift in how I see myself as an ally or advocate, because I feel like being a progressive person raised by progressive West Coast white people, always felt ourselves to be advocates without really understanding how much work and self-work actually goes into being a true ally and advocate. So
yeah. And I think the key piece there that you said, you surrounded yourself with people of color. So for you, I mean, to your point, you already connected in that space. So it was a sense that you were already um, feeling some of the tensions that some of us deal with, and of course now being married to my beautiful Miss Andrea. Talk a little bit, Andrea, about what does allyship and advocacy mean to you as an African American female?
Yeah. I think it's changed. It's definitely changed. It's definitely evolved and deepened. I think, and George, of course, is never going to give himself enough credit for how vocal and genuine he is. And going to the college that we went to, it was not an HBCU. It was the only non-HBCU in the CIAA. It's like 80% Black, 20% white,
Yeah.
and then the faculty is switched. So he had Black friends when we met. I had never thought about, that's not true. When I was in kindergarten and when I was in elementary school, I had a strong white man phase. So I was interested then. But then when I got older, I never considered dating a white person. So seeing him and his comfort with Black people, I think was like, oh, he's kind of okay. He's with it, and he's not trying to be anything extra like a. So, but early on in our relationship, I think I was satisfied with sharing my experience as a Black person, as a Black woman, and being heard and engaged. I don't think I requested or needed anything extra from Jordan.
Okay.
In the middle of our relationship, I remember Jordan being a lot more vocal. So we're 4 years apart and 4 years apart in school. So once he graduated from college, he moved to Nashville, Tennessee, did an internship and then lived there. And so, and when I graduated from college, I moved there and we lived there together for 2 years. But while I was in college and visiting him in Nashville, I remember him being a lot more vocal, a lot more of an active ally. And that scared me. I think that made me uncomfortable.
Why?
Yeah. In those situations, I think I felt seen. I felt like we're all, and all of his friends are white. All of our friends from there are white. And I think I had never been in a position with having close relationships with white people. Jordan's my first close relationship outside of childhood friends with a white person. And so I think just talking about race around white people at that time for me was like, I don't want to feel othered. I think that's what it was. I don't want to feel like I'm an outsider.
Being singled out.
Yeah, I don't want to feel singled out. I don't want someone to retaliate in a weird way. I don't know, in regular conversation, because Jordan brought up something about race. And so that's a time I really regret, because, and I think it just is what it is. It's something we had to go through and something that I needed for our relationship to evolve with race. But that was a time where he was really active and vocal. And I think he quieted down a little bit after that. And then in more recent years in our relationship, I think our voices have strengthened, our relationship has strengthened. Noting our differences and respecting each other's differences has been more of a priority. And throughout all of this, through this most recent I'll call it a rebellion. I think I've really realized and have been able to deal with my own internalized racism.
Okay.
And I've been able to deal with my white in-laws, my white friends, and really lay out the ways I felt that I wasn't seen, that I haven't been seen as my full self. And that's helped me. And Jordan, and asking Jordan to share in that and not just listen to what I'm saying, but to also engage in a real way and have his own experience and share his own experience with me.
I think the what I'm hearing, the commonality again is this communication, just communicating with each other and talking about things and not being silent, right? Is very important. What's the toughest thing that you guys had to deal with as a couple in this space of racism, anti-racism?
I think during this past, probably the week after George Floyd's murder, we had I was in a space where I felt it wasn't my space to hold attention for how hurt I was, and that played off very, very poorly because what it appeared, is the pandemic, still is pandemic. So we were in this house together during our work day, all the time. And that was a really, really hard 3 weeks for Andrea. And I think she felt that I was just witnessing her pain and not sharing in any of it. And I think we've had some of the most brutal, hard, difficult conversations about race in that 3-week time period. And it was hard, but it was really great. It was really great. And much needed.
Yeah, it was necessary.
Yeah.
And I think you're the example of what needs to happen, right? It is that you are forced into a conversation about a difficult topic, right? And I feel like this is where we are in society. We have tried everything but to really talk about it, right? And now we're at this point where we are talking about it. And I think that's why we're starting to see the things that we are, because people are speaking about it. Both sides of the coin, right, are really talking about it. So what's your hope? Because you guys don't have children yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm gonna be like your mama. You don't have children yet. What's your hope for the future? What would you want to tell your kids?
So we talked about this in preparation of probably a week ago. I think my hope for our children is that they take from both sides, they take from both cultures. Like, I think I used to really want my kids to identify strongly with being Black, their Black side. I'm like, the world's going to see you as Black. I want you to know and feel pride in that. And I think more recently I have come to maybe more of a balance, and that I do want our kids to feel strong in both cultures. I love about white culture that white people have allowed white people to be weird. And I think that's a privilege that is sometimes glazed over. But white people can be a whole lot of flavors. And sometimes Black people, we don't allow each other to do that. and I think that's rooted in white supremacy sometimes too. Like
Right.
there's
Right.
one lane, there's one way to do this, one way to succeed.
Mhm.
So I hope that our children take some of that, and I hope our children take my flavor, my rhythm, you know, and other good things. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Jordan?
To me, as I analyze my childhood based off of conversations of Andrea talking about her childhood, it's not really about what our parents did differently, because they're actually shockingly similar
Mhm.
in how they parented us. But it's just what society put on each of us as children and as
Yeah.
teenagers. And I think representation, for whether we have little boys or little girls, I want them to turn on the TV. I want them to be playing video games. I want them to be reading stories. I want them to be consuming and being entertained and seeing themselves and representations of themselves in what they're consuming, and see beautiful people that look like them, and to take that for granted. I want them to be able to not think anything of that it's strange that there's someone that looks like them, that's seen as beautiful, as seen as powerful, as seen as the hero, that's seen as anything. And because it's something I took for granted as a little white boy. You know, I love Star Wars. I love Lord of the Rings. And they're all, people who look like me with beards and all that. And the other thing is, like, I was given a lot of space during my rebellious teenage years to just be odd, to be strange, to have those. I look back at pictures just a weird dude, just a weird teenage kid who was going through something, and this is how I decided to, express myself. And I never felt that. I felt like society celebrated that within me. And so I'm piggybacking off of what Ann said. I want that freedom.
Yeah, freedom, I think, that's the underlying theme.
Yeah. But I want them to feel connected to their Blackness as well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what my role will be in empowering those feelings within my Black children, of how to empower them to embrace their Blackness. So,
well, on that note, I want to thank you for sharing. I'm going to bring our guests on. I want to thank you all for joining. I know a couple had to leave. I think Lisa had to leave. I don't see her here, but I want to thank all of you for joining in on this conversation. It's such an important conversation. I thought it would be one that we wouldn't have to continue to have, but it's so important for us to continue to have it. As you guys said earlier, I can't remember who said it. It's like the momentum was there, and then it seemed to waver a little bit. And my prayer is that we continue to keep this in the forefront, because it's important. We're not going to see change unless we continue to have these conversations. So, last question. What would you tell someone who's on the fence right now, just not knowing what to do in this space? Because we know we still do have a lot of people who just don't know what to do, right? Anyone?
That there's space for us to fix a multitude of problems. I think people tend to categorize what challenges our society are facing, and that this idea that we need to just tackle one at a time. And it's like, no, you can embrace all these things. We can make this world better by facing a lot of these different challenges. You don't have to categorize things. So.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, I think Lois said it earlier, but first giving yourself grace to know that it's okay, you're not born with all the right information, and that you can learn. So just pick up whatever. There's so much out here. I would say start with your social media, Google a starting spot, and take it from there.
Yeah. Anyone else? And everyone doesn't have to speak, but if you have anything else to share.
I would just say take the first step, right? And step into it, and be brave, be bold, educate yourself. If you know nothing else to do, there's tons of information out there. Just start educating yourself, educate your village and those around you, your family, your children. And then just start taking steps. And as we had talked about earlier, that assumption of positive intent. And yes, I would say giving yourself grace, knowing that you don't have to have all of the answers. But if you operate in the space of being positive and trying to do the right thing, then I believe that collectively we can figure things out.
Yeah. Lois or Tori? Go ahead, Tori.
I would say Pastor Ed's words, I wrote them down here in because I told Michelle the other day, what I run into is the conservative Christians who don't, will respond, all lives matter. And what you said about the difference between Christians who believe in Jesus or God or those that believe him is spot on. Those people that like carry their cross, in front of them and say, I'm Christian, I'm good, are some of the people that, are the most offensive. But those, I think of us, I like to include myself, the ones that believe in Jesus, are the ones that want to do better, want to make the world like. So I wrote those words down. So thank you, Pastor Ed.
Thank you.
I think for me, so someone who's on the fence, usually that's because you haven't had enough conversations. And so I think take one of those steps that you take, and one of the ways you learn is to start having very honest and real conversations where you listen more than you talk, and you let how you feel in those moments help you make those decisions. And then the love for that person, let that just start to grow and come out of you. And I promise you, you do that enough times, you'll find yourself on the right side, which is allyship and anti-racism. And so that's one of the things I would leave with somebody who's kind of on the fence with that.
Well, and I would say in my demographic, I think the first thing someone in my demographic is humble yourself, just because, you don't know everything. And, you come to a certain age and you think you know everything. Humble yourself, be willing to unlearn, be willing to learn, be willing to recognize where you were wrong. Check in with yourself first. This isn't just an other, this is a self thing.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me. It's been a very rich conversation, so rich. Time just went by, but all of you mean so much to me, and you have helped me to become a better person myself. And I really just appreciate your support in this space. And you never know, I'll be tapping into you again. So just stay tuned. And on that note, I'm just going to end with thank you all for listening. I know it's been a long night, but I did feel like each of these segments just brought so much richness to it. And we all don't live in one bubble. We are a part of, there's many different facets of our lives in which we engage. So it is an important conversation. And my goal for this series, as I said earlier, is that something that is shared, you'll be able to take and do something with it, more positive with it, right? The goal is just really for you to take a step. So I'm hoping that's something that you've learned. You'll be able to do just that. And stay tuned for my next episode. As I said to you before, I'm going to do these monthly, but coping during stressful times. I think right now we're living in very stressful times, whether it is COVID, which yes, we're still dealing with that, and kids going back to school, and we'll be entering into the holidays soon. So that will be my topic in October. Thank you for joining me. Please share this video. There are a lot of different segments, and I'm sure someone will learn something from each and every one of these segments. I appreciate all of you. Have a good night.